Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this in-depth summary and review of Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life by Marshall Rosenberg.
Oh, yeah.
This book has become pretty popular for its approach to building stronger connections. And I have to say, I was really impressed by how practical and insightful it is.
Yeah, you can definitely see Rosenberg's background as a psychologist and conflict mediator shining through.
Hmm.
He doesn't just talk about communication in theory, he gives you a framework for actually changing the way you interact with people, even when things get tough.
Yeah, one of the things that really struck me early on was how the book challenges our typical understanding of violence.
Right.
It's not just about physical acts, but also about those subtle ways we can hurt each other with our words.
Right. It's like he's expanding the definition of violence to include things like judgments or comparisons or
Hmm.
even just dismissing someone's feelings. He argues that this kind of passive violence can actually be the seed for bigger conflicts down the line.
I thought that analogy of the family tree of violence was really powerful. He shows how even seemingly small acts of disrespect or invalidation can build up over time and damage relationships.
It's fascinating because he's not saying we need to walk on eggshells or avoid any kind of disagreement.
Right.
It's more about becoming aware of how our communication impacts others and making conscious choices to connect rather than disconnect.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics of how nonviolent communication actually works. He lays out this four-part process, and the first step is all about observation. What exactly does that entail?
It's about learning to separate what you actually see and hear from your own interpretations and judgments.
Okay.
It's easy to jump to conclusions or label someone based on their actions, but the goal here is to simply observe what's happening without adding your own spin on it.
So is it kind of like hitting the pause button on those automatic reactions we all have?
hmm
Like, instead of calling someone lazy, you might simply observe that the dishes haven't been done yet.
Exactly. And that might seem like a small difference, but it can have a huge impact on how the other person receives your message. When you remove the judgment, it creates space for understanding and dialogue.
There's that great story in the book about the college student who kept getting interrupted while trying to read. Instead of getting annoyed, she used NVC to figure out what was going on with her colleague.
Oh, yeah, that's a perfect example of how choosing empathy over defensiveness can completely change the course of an interaction. By focusing on understanding her colleague's needs, she was able to turn a potential conflict into a moment of connection.
It's a good reminder that empathy isn't about agreeing with someone. It's about making the effort to see things from their perspective, which actually leads us perfectly into the second component of NVC, expressing our feelings.
This is where things get really interesting because Rosenberg argues that many of us have actually been conditioned to suppress or deny our feelings. Think about how many times you've heard phrases like, don't be so sensitive, or just get over it.
It's like we're taught to bottle up our emotions, which can make it really hard to communicate effectively. But Rosenberg says that being able to express our feelings authentically is actually crucial for healthy relationships.
Right, and he talks about this process of moving from emotional slavery, where we feel responsible for other people's emotions, to emotional liberation, where we can express ourselves honestly while still respecting others.
So how do we get to that point of emotional liberation? I mean, it's one thing to recognize that you have feelings, but it's another to actually express them in a way that doesn't create more conflict.
Well, Rosenberg provides a lot of practical tips in the book. One of the key things is to use clear and specific language to describe your emotional state. He even includes a whole list of feeling words to help you go beyond those generic terms like good or bad.
He also talks about avoiding language that places blame on others, like saying, "you make me feel." It's about taking responsibility for your own emotional experience while still acknowledging the situation that contributed to it.
Exactly. It's a subtle but powerful shift in perspective that can make a huge difference in how your message is received. It's about saying, I feel this way, rather than, you made me feel this way.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've covered observations and feelings. What's the next piece of the NVC puzzle?
The next step is identifying and expressing your needs. This is where it gets really deep because Rosenberg believes that all human behavior is ultimately driven by a desire to meet universal human needs.
And he's not just talking about basic survival needs like food and shelter. He includes things like connection, autonomy, meaning, and purpose.
Right. And he argues that when we can clearly articulate what we're truly needing in a given situation, it becomes much easier to find solutions that work for everyone involved.
I love that example he gives about the woman who is frustrated by her husband's long work hours. Instead of demanding that he change, she realized that her underlying need was for quality time with him.
It's a great example of how shifting your focus from what you don't want to what you do want can open up new possibilities for communication and problem solving.
So we've got observations, feelings, and needs. What's the final piece of this NVC framework?
The final step is making requests. This is where you express what you would like the other person to do to help meet your needs.
But it's not about demanding or trying to control the other person. Rosenberg is very clear about the difference between requests and demands.
Right. A request is made with the understanding that the other person has the right to say no without facing any negative consequences. It's about respecting their autonomy while still advocating for your own needs.
He also emphasizes the importance of making clear and specific requests, using positive language that focuses on what you want rather than what you don't want.
For example, instead of saying, "Don't leave your clothes on the floor," you might say, "Would you be willing to hang up your clothes when you're finished with them?"
It's about moving away from criticism and blame and towards a more collaborative and respectful approach.
Exactly. And I think that's a key theme throughout the entire book, finding that balance between honoring your own needs and respecting the needs of others. It's about creating a space where everyone feels heard, understood, and valued.
And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of the book that I'd love to get your thoughts on. Rosenberg's insights into resolving those internal conflicts we all face. It seems he believes many of these NVC principles can be applied to our own inner dialogue as well.
That's right. He talks about how we often treat ourselves with the same kind of judgment and criticism that we might direct towards others. And he encourages us to cultivate self-compassion, to approach our own mistakes and shortcomings with the same empathy and understanding we would offer to a loved one.
So instead of beating ourselves up for our flaws, we can ask ourselves, what unmet need was I trying to meet when I acted that way?
Exactly. It's about shifting from self-criticism to self-discovery, to understanding the motivations behind our actions and using that knowledge to grow and evolve.
There's a lot to unpack here, so let's dive into more of those inner conflicts and how we can apply NVC principles to navigate them.
He also encourages us to practice mourning our unmet needs.
Okay.
It's about acknowledging those feelings of sadness, disappointment, or even anger that can arise when our needs haven't been met.
So rather than trying to push those feelings aside, we actually need to allow ourselves to feel them fully in order to move forward.
Exactly. It's like creating space for those emotions so they don't get bottled up and create more problems down the line.
That makes sense. And once we've acknowledged and processed those feelings, what's the next step?
Well, then we can start exploring new and more constructive ways to meet those needs. It's about moving from a place of scarcity and lack to a place of abundance and possibility.
I really like how Rosenberg frames this whole process as a journey of liberating ourselves from old programming. It's about letting go of those limiting beliefs and behaviors that no longer serve us.
And it's a lifelong journey. Like, it's not about achieving some kind of perfect state of self-compassion, but about continuously learning and growing.
You know, one of the things that really stood out to me throughout the book was Rosenberg's emphasis on the importance of intention.
Yeah.
It's not just about what we say, but why we say it.
Absolutely. He argues that our intention should always be to connect with the other person, to foster understanding and compassion, even when we're disagreeing or expressing difficult emotions.
He even suggests that we regularly check in with ourselves and ask, what is my intention in this moment? Am I speaking from a place of love or a place of fear?
That's such a powerful question to ask yourself, especially in the heat of the moment when it's easy to react defensively or lash out.
And he's not saying that we should never feel anger or frustration.
Yeah.
It's more about becoming aware of those emotions and
Yeah.
choosing to respond in a way that aligns with our values.
Right. He talks about how communicating from a place of fear, shame, or guilt can actually create more conflict and disconnection.
One of the most practical and insightful sections of the book, for me, was his discussion of expressing appreciation.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like something so simple, but he really breaks it down in a way that makes you realize how often we miss the mark.
It's true. We might compliment someone on their appearance or their achievements without actually acknowledging the qualities we appreciate about them.
And Rosenberg offers this really helpful framework for expressing appreciation that goes beyond those superficial compliments. He suggests focusing on 3 key elements: the action that we appreciate, the feeling that it evoked in us, and the need of ours that was met.
So instead of saying, "You're a great cook," you might say something like, "I really enjoyed that delicious meal you prepared." It made me feel so nourished and cared for, and it really fulfilled my need for connection and enjoyment.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's so much more specific and heartfelt than just a generic compliment.
And he also encourages us to be mindful of how we receive appreciation. It's about avoiding those traps of egotism or false humility and simply allowing ourselves to feel the joy of knowing that we've made a positive impact on someone else.
It's about recognizing that we all have the capacity to contribute to the well-being of others.
Now, one of the things that might seem a bit contradictory at first is Rosenberg's discussion of the protective use of force.
Right.
It might seem strange to talk about force in a book about nonviolent communication.
I know, right? But he acknowledges that there are times when using force might be necessary, especially when it comes to protecting ourselves or others from harm.
And he's very clear that this isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about intervening in a way that prevents further violence or harm.
He uses the example of a child running into traffic. A parent might have to physically restrain the child to prevent them from getting hurt, even if the child doesn't understand or appreciate it in the moment.
Right. It's about acting from a place of care and concern, even if it means using force as a last resort.
And he talks about the importance of communicating your intentions clearly, even when you're using force. It's about maintaining that connection with the other person and avoiding actions that might cause humiliation or degradation.
He also talks about using these principles in schools. He suggests that strategies like timeouts or temporary restraints can be used to create a safer environment, but only if they're implemented with empathy and a focus on preventing harm.
So it's about finding that delicate balance between setting boundaries and preserving dignity.
Exactly. And that ties back to one of the core principles of NVC, respecting the needs of both ourselves and others. It's about finding solutions that work for everyone involved.
That reminds me of something else Rosenberg talks about, the importance of living in the present moment.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of conflict arises from dwelling on the past or worrying about the future.
He talks about the power of letting go of those past grievances and future anxieties and focusing on connecting with the people around us right here,
Yeah.
right now.
It's about being fully present with our own experience and with the experience of others, listening with our hearts as well as our minds.
And it's not always easy, especially when we're triggered or caught up in our own thoughts and emotions. But it's a practice, right? The more we can cultivate that awareness, the easier it becomes to stay grounded in the present moment.
There's something else he mentions that I think is really important, practicing gratitude.
Oh, yeah.
It's about taking the time to notice and appreciate the good things in our lives, even when things are tough.
He suggests that gratitude is an antidote to scarcity thinking. When we focus on what we're grateful for, it helps us to shift our perspective and see the abundance that already exists in our lives.
I love that. And he encourages us to approach life with a sense of playfulness and curiosity. It's about experimenting with new ways of communicating and relating to the world around us.
It's about embracing the journey with all of its ups and downs and finding joy in the process of learning and growing.
Well, this has been such an insightful exploration of nonviolent communication. I'm curious, what are your final thoughts on the book and its potential impact on our lives?
For me, nonviolent communication is more than just a guide to better communication. It's a philosophy, a way of being in the world that has the potential to transform not only our relationships, but also our own inner lives.
Yeah, it's like he's giving us a new language, a way of speaking and listening that creates more compassion and understanding.
And while it might take some effort to really integrate these principles into our lives, I think the rewards are well worth it. We're talking about deeper connections, less conflict, and a greater sense of peace and well-being.
One of the things that really resonated with me is Rosenberg's belief that everyone has the capacity for compassion and connection.
Yeah.
It's not some special gift that only certain people have. It's something we could all cultivate.
It's a really hopeful message, especially in a world that can often feel so divided and disconnected.
Nonviolent Communication is definitely a book I'll be coming back to again and again. There's so much wisdom packed into its pages, and I think it has something to offer everyone, regardless of their background or experience.
I couldn't agree more. It's a book that speaks to that universal human desire for connection, understanding, and peace. And it gives us a roadmap for actually creating those things in our own lives and in the world around us.
Well, that was a truly insightful exploration of nonviolent communication. I hope you all found it as thought-provoking and inspiring as we did. And if you're looking for more in-depth summaries and reviews of books that can help you grow and learn, be sure to check out more content on the Audiobooks Quiver YouTube channel. We've got tons of great stuff waiting for you.